My parents disowned my sister when she got pregnant. I took her in and raised the baby as my own 3 years later. Our parents returned and discovered the shocking truth. I'm 33 and I still feel like I'm 10 years old every time I step foot in that house. Every Sunday, like clockwork, I drive down the same cracked road lined with those stupid pine trees everyone in this town romanticizes, like Lake Pine is some cozy Hallmark postcard. It's not. It's suffocating, quiet in all the wrong ways. And that house, my parents' house, still looks the same. Perfectly trimmed hedges, beige siding, those dumb ceramic planters with flowers my mom plants every spring like she gives a shit about life blooming. Inside it's cold. Not physically. They keep the thermostat at 72 year-round. But it's the kind of cold that seeps into your gut. Like walking into a museum where everything looks expensive and dead. My dad, Harold, sits in his recliner like a damn king, newspaper in one hand, remote in the other, glasses sliding down his nose while he pretends not to see me come in. My mom, Margaret, always in some blouse that looks like it was ironed by angels, fussing over nothing in the kitchen. She doesn't even turn around when she hears the door open anymore. Just says, shoes off. I sit at the table, eat the same roast beef, mashed potatoes, overcooked green beans. Same meal every Sunday, because change is dangerous. My dad asks how work is going in that tone like he's trying to remember if I still write code, or if I've failed into something even less respectable. My mom corrects how I hold my fork. They ask if I've met anyone. I haven't. Not because I'm not trying. Because I don't even know how to be with someone when I spend every minute unlearning the way I was raised. I'm not even sure they like each other anymore. They don't fight. They don't touch. They just exist next to each other like co-workers who got stuck in the same office for too many years. But to the outside world, they're flawless. He handled taxes for half the town before retiring. She taught generations of middle schoolers how to diagram sentences. Respected. Proper. The kind of people who always bring a dish to church potlucks and make you feel like you're underdressed, even when you're not. Melissa didn't speak at dinner. Never really did. Even when we were kids. She was quiet in a way that made you feel guilty for talking. She lived in books, drew little hearts on the corners of her nursing textbooks like she believed in healing more than living. I'd find her asleep on the floor of her room with anatomy diagrams spread around her like she was trying to memorize her way out of the house. She wanted to be a nurse. Still does, I think. I don't ask anymore. I already know the answer. She's still there. Still playing the good daughter. Still shrinking into the silence. When we were younger, she'd come into my room at night, just slipping like a ghost and curl up beside me without saying a word. She didn't cry, just breathe slow, like she was waiting for the world to stop shaking. I never told her to leave. I think I needed her there just as much as she needed me. Our parents never said anything. I don't even think they noticed. They were too busy polishing the lie of us. I tried to leave the house 1,000 times before I actually did. College was the first escape, but even then, I called every week, visited when I could, played the part. I got a job, moved back to town because it made sense financially, and now I'm stuck in this loop. Visit, nod, eat, leave, go home and sit in my apartment with the lights off, wondering if it was as bad as I remember or if I'm just weak. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd fought back more. Said no louder. Refused to let them mold me into this obedient version of myself. But then I remember the way my dad's voice would drop into that low warning tone. How my mom's face would twist into that look that said she wasn't mad, just disappointed, which was always so much worse. And I remember Melissa flinching when a dish clattered too loud or when someone raised their voice on TV. They taught us that love means control, that silence is peace, that obedience is safety. And now I'm 33 and I still can't make a decision without hearing my mother's voice in the back of my head reminding me how easy it is to disappoint someone. I go to work. I meet deadlines. I don't complain. I sit through dinners like I'm watching myself from outside my body. Melissa told me once, quietly, like she was confessing a sin, that she still dreams about running away. She's 28 and still lives at home. She works part-time at a local clinic, studies online, saves every penny, but I know she's not leaving. Not really. That house has her wrapped up in its fake warmth, its routines, its little lies. It's the only place she knows how to be invisible. I don't hate my parents. That would make this easier. I envy people with screaming families, broken plates, and door-slamming fights. At least that kind of pain is honest. What I grew up in was quiet, controlled, measured, polite on the surface, but underneath it was fear and guilt and this gnawing sense that nothing you did would ever be enough. I go back every week because that's what's expected. Because breaking the cycle feels like treason. Because some stupid part of me still wants to be seen, to be told I'm good enough, even though I know it'll never happen. And maybe I'm not visiting them anymore. Maybe I'm visiting the version of me that still lived in that house, hoping one day I'll walk in and it'll be different. But it never is. It's always the same roast beef, same dead silence, same look in Melissa's eyes. I get in my car. I drive home. I sit in the dark. I don't cry. I don't scream. I just breathe, slow, like she used to. Like maybe the world will stop shaking long enough for me to forget that I still haven't left. It was a Thursday night, early spring, one of those evenings where the air still bites but the light lingers a little longer than it used to, and I was sitting on the balcony of my apartment with a cup of tea that had already gone cold. I don't know what I was expecting from the night. Probably just silence, maybe a little coding, maybe nothing. But Melissa called me out of nowhere, and her voice was shaking before she even said my name. She didn't cry. She never did. Not really. But there was this tightness in the way she spoke, like she'd spent the last few hours holding her breath and was only now remembering how to let it out. She asked if she could come over. Just that. No explanation. No details. And I didn't ask. I just said yes and left the door unlocked. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. Not because she looked different, but because she didn't try to hide how tired she was. Melissa always put effort into that. Makeup, neat hair, posture, that perfect quiet dignity she wore like armor in front of our parents, in public, even with me most of the time. But tonight she was just exhausted. Her hoodie was 2 sizes too big, probably one of mine from years ago, and she kept pulling the sleeves over her hands like she didn't want to be seen at all. She didn't sit right away, just stood near the counter, fiddling with a tea bag from the box like she didn't know what to do with it. I didn't push her. I waited. And when she finally spoke, it came out flat. Almost mechanical. Like she'd rehearsed it 100 times. I'm 5 months pregnant. It didn't register at first. Not completely. I just stared at her, and she stared back, and I must have said something like what because she repeated it. Slower this time. 5 months. Pregnant. Her hands didn't stop moving. Tea bag. Wrapper. Twist. Untwist. Tear. She couldn't look me in the eye. I felt like the ground under me wasn't solid anymore. Not because I was angry. I wasn't. I was scared. Not for me. For her. For what this meant. For what she was carrying. Not just physically, but all the other weight that came with it. Our parents, the town, the expectations, the silence. The goddamn silence. I asked who the father was. She hesitated, just for a second, and then said his name like it was a secret that hurt to say out loud. Josh. He used to be one of her classmates. I remembered him vaguely. Tall. Quiet. A little older than her. He'd graduated early, moved away, hadn't seen him in over a year. She told me he bailed the second she told him. Took a job in San Francisco. Blocked her number. Ghosted her like she was some mistake he didn't want following him into his new life. She said it without crying. Still no tears. But her voice cracked in this way that made me want to destroy something. Not him. Not even the situation. Just the fucking cruelty of it all. How easy it is for some people to walk away and how hard it is for others to even stand up straight when they've been left behind. I asked if she had told Mom and Dad. She shook her head, fast, like I'd said something absurd. I can't, she said. David, I can't. You know what they'll do. And she was right. I didn't know. I could already hear the speeches, feel the cold walls closing in. Margaret would look at her like she was filth, like she'd embarrassed the family beyond repair. She wouldn't yell. She'd just speak in that calm, measured way that cut deeper than screaming ever could. Harold wouldn't say much. He'd sit in silence, jaw tight, maybe leave the room. But it wouldn't be about disappointment. It would be about shame. About what people would think. About image. That was always the priority. Never the child. Never us. Melissa sat down eventually. I made her tea she didn't drink. She kept her hands on her stomach like she wasn't sure she was allowed to touch herself anymore. I asked her if she was keeping it, and she nodded. Not right away, but eventually. Slowly. Deliberately. Like she was giving herself permission. She told me she thought about everything. About her studies, about dropping out, about hiding. But in the end, she said it just felt wrong to pretend the baby didn't exist. I've already talked to a clinic, she said. I've had the scans. Everything's fine. She's healthy. And that was when I felt something shift in my chest. Not pain. Not joy. Just this strange, quiet clarity that things weren't ever going to be the same again. There was going to be a child. A little girl. Melissa's daughter. And she was already growing inside someone who had been taught her whole life how to disappear. We didn't say much after that. She stayed on the couch for a while, curled up like she used to when she was a kid. I didn't ask more questions. I didn't offer advice. I just sat nearby, kept the light low, kept the world outside. For a few hours, we were just two siblings again, caught in a storm neither of us had asked for, trying to hold on to whatever pieces we had left. And when she finally stood up to leave, she hugged me. Not a quick one. Not polite. A real hug. The kind that says everything you can't figure out how to put into words. I held her tight, and I didn't tell her it would be okay. Because I didn't know if it would be. All I knew was I wasn't going to let her face it alone. It was a Sunday, which already meant it was going to be a bad day, because nothing good ever happened in that house on a Sunday. Melissa sat next to me in the passenger seat, barely breathing, her fingers tangled in the sleeve of her coat like she thought it might keep her from unraveling. She hadn't spoken since we left my apartment, not even when I asked if she wanted to turn back. She just stared out the window, her profile sharp against the gray sky, her expression locked somewhere between terror and numbness. I kept my eyes on the road and tried not to think about how many times I'd driven this exact route, how familiar the turns were, how the trees lining the shoulder looked like they'd been drawn by someone trying too hard to make the town look peaceful. The house was exactly the same, of course. It always was. Beige, clean, lifeless. Like a showroom for a life no one actually lived in. I parked in the same spot I always did and sat there for a minute with the engine running, waiting for Melissa to say something, anything. But she didn't. She just opened the door and stepped out like someone walking into their own execution. I followed. Margaret was at the kitchen table with her tea. As usual, reading the newspaper like it contained the commandments of some invisible god she worshipped more than her family. Harold was in the recliner, the TV muted, golf playing even though he never played a day in his life. They both looked up when we walked in, and I could see the suspicion click into place instantly. They weren't used to us arriving together, unannounced, with no roast beef and no reminders. My mother set down her cup with mechanical precision. My father didn't move, but his eyes locked onto Melissa like he was calculating her worth in real time. We stood there for a second too long. The air was thick. Melissa's hand brushed mine, and I felt it tremble. I looked at her, then at them, and I realized I was done waiting for the perfect moment. There wasn't going to be one. This family didn't do perfect. We just did polished ruin. So I spoke. Melissa has something to tell you. She flinched, just slightly, and I hated myself for making her do this. But I also knew she had to. She stepped forward and swallowed hard, and when she spoke, her voice was small but steady. I'm pregnant. That was it. Just 2 words. No apologies. No softening. No explanations. Just the truth, finally out loud in the one place it was guaranteed to die. The silence that followed wasn't really silence. It was worse. It was the sound of something ancient cracking down the middle. My father sat there frozen for a moment, like his brain couldn't compute the sentence. Then he stood up. What did you just say? I'm 5 months pregnant, she said, and I could hear her trying not to cry. The father's not around. He left. I'm keeping the baby. It happened fast. Faster than I expected. 1 second Harold was just standing there. The next he was shouting, so loud the walls shook. You are no longer my daughter. The words hit like a slap, and Melissa took a step back. I moved toward her on instinct, shielding her without thinking, but my eyes were still on him. His face was red, lips curled back like he couldn't believe what he was saying, except I knew he could. I knew he'd been waiting for a moment like this to remind us both who he really was. Margaret stood next. She didn't yell. She didn't even raise her voice. She just looked at Melissa like she was something dirty tracked in from the street. Get out of the house. There was no negotiation. No moment of hesitation. Just that. Like Melissa had committed some unforgivable crime by refusing to be the silent little girl they raised to make them look good. I stepped in front of her before I even realized I was moving. She's not going anywhere alone, I said, and I didn't care how loud my voice got. If she's out, I'm out. My father scoffed like that meant nothing to him. Maybe it didn't. Maybe it never did. I took Melissa's hand and walked out without another word. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see their faces. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of watching us break. We got in the car, and I started the engine. She was crying quietly now, the kind of crying that doesn't make a sound but leaves you gasping for air. I reached over and grabbed her hand again, held it tight, not because I had the right words to say, but because I wanted her to feel one thing in that moment that was real. That we were still here. That we were still standing. We didn't have a plan. We didn't know where we were going. But I knew one thing without question. We'd manage. We'd figure it out. Because anything was better than being part of that house again. The apartment wasn't built for 2 people, especially not 2 people carrying that much weight between them. But I cleared off the secondhand futon and moved my monitors to the far end of the desk to make space. And that night Melissa lay curled up in my bed while I sat on the floor with a blanket and tried to pretend the springs digging into my back weren't there. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling fan spinning in slow, lazy circles and listened to the quiet, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling or the hum of the fridge trying to keep up. Everything felt too small. The room, the air, my life. But she was here, and I was not going to let her go through this alone. Not now. Not after everything. I picked up extra work where I could, doubled up on freelance projects, said yes to jobs I normally wouldn't have touched, because they paid late or barely paid at all. Didn't matter. I needed the money. I needed the buffer. Every invoice I sent felt like a lifeline. I was writing scripts in the early mornings and debugging client garbage at midnight, barely looking away from the screen long enough to eat. My laptop was open so long it felt warm like a body next to me. Coffee didn't help anymore. Neither did energy drinks. It was just this constant hum of survival. Melissa tried to help in her own way. She kept the place clean, folded my laundry without being asked, tried cooking even though she never really learned. She'd apologize every time something came out weird or burnt or just sad looking, but I always ate it. I didn't care. I told her it was great. And sometimes, when the food didn't come out right, we'd sit on the floor with peanut butter and crackers and laugh like we weren't terrified of the future. The neighbors started talking, of course. This building wasn't the kind of place where people minded their own business. The woman in 3B always smoked on her balcony and watched us come and go like we were a soap opera. Some of them thought Melissa was my girlfriend, maybe my ex, maybe something worse. I heard the whispers. I saw the looks in the hallway, the way people paused when we walked by. Someone even asked me once if I was taking care of my problem, whatever the hell that meant. I wanted to punch him. I didn't. I just nodded and walked past like it didn't matter. But it did. It always did. There were nights when I'd get home from a second shift of work, eyes dry and spine aching, and find Melissa asleep on the couch with her hand resting over her belly like she was afraid someone might take it from her. And I'd stand there for a minute, just looking at her, remembering when she was small and used to climb into my bed because she couldn't sleep, and how I'd wrap my arms around her back then and promise her it was going to be okay even though I never really believed it. I wanted to believe it now. I had to. We didn't talk about our parents. Not really. Every now and then I'd see something flicker across her face when she got quiet in the middle of a sentence or when she reached for the phone and changed her mind. I knew she missed them. I missed them too, in the way you miss a limb that got amputated after it turned toxic. I thought maybe they'd call. They didn't. I checked my phone every day anyway. The days blurred together. Code. Eat. Work. Sleep. Repeat. Sometimes Melissa would hum when she cleaned or talked to the baby like it could already hear her. She started reading again. Medical books at first, then novels. Stuff she used to love. She said it helped. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. I could see it in her eyes. The way she started sitting with her back straighter. The way she touched her stomach like it meant something. I kept working. I kept going. Because the only thing worse than being tired was the idea of letting her down. I remember one night, the power cut out. Some line blew 2 blocks over, and the whole street went dark except for the glow from distant windows running on generators. We lit candles and sat on the floor with a bag of chips and nothing to do. No screens. No distractions. Just silence and the soft flicker of flame. She looked at me and said, "Thank you." Like I'd saved her, like I hadn't just dragged her into the same mess I was barely holding together. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and passed her the last chip. I was exhausted. All the time. My body was giving up one piece at a time. My hands ached. My eyes stung. I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed without immediately feeling guilty for it. But somehow, in all of it, in the dark and the noise and the pressure, something had changed. I didn't feel like a shadow in my own life anymore. I didn't feel invisible. We were 2 broken people in a one-room apartment filled with secondhand furniture and too many dishes in the sink, but it was ours. We were surviving. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. We got to the hospital in the middle of the night, everything packed in a cheap duffel bag I triple-checked like it was a bomb I didn't know how to defuse. Melissa was already in pain, gripping my hand so hard it left marks on my skin, but she didn't scream. She didn't fall apart. She just clenched her jaw and told the nurse her name, her due date, her insurance info, like she was giving a presentation she hadn't had time to prepare for. I followed her through the sliding doors, heart pounding like I was the one in labor. It was surreal. The fluorescent lights. The smell of antiseptic. The way the nurses looked at me like they couldn't quite tell if I was her brother, her partner, or just someone who didn't know where to stand. I didn't know either. Everything happened fast after that. The contractions came harder. She got quiet, and then louder. The monitors beeped. A nurse barked instructions. And then the doctor came in and told me to suit up like I was about to step into an operating room, not the birth of a human being. I held her hand the whole time, whispered that she was doing great even when she wasn't sure she believed it, told her to breathe even though I wasn't sure I was breathing myself. The room was chaos and silence all at once. When they told me to cut the cord, my hands shook. They handed me the scissors like it was no big deal, like I'd done this before. I hadn't, but I did it. I looked down at this tiny, wrinkled, red-skinned thing that had just been screaming seconds ago and was now blinking up into the light like it had no idea what kind of world it had just landed in. They placed him in Melissa's arms, and she cried. Not loud, just enough for her voice to crack, and I stood next to her trying not to cry too. I failed. We named him Max. No middle name. No hyphen. Just Max clean. Simple. Strong. The nurses wheeled Melissa to recovery, and I stayed behind to hold Max while they cleaned him up and checked his vitals and did all the things they do to brand new lives. He was so small. I couldn't believe how small he was. Like a secret you didn't want to say out loud. I carried him to the room like he was made of glass. The first night back home was brutal. He cried, then stopped, then cried again. I fumbled with the formula instructions like I was defusing a bomb again. Too hot. Too cold. Not enough powder. Too much. I tried burping him, rocking him, swaddling him. Nothing worked. Everything worked. It was a blur of movement and panic and moments where he finally closed his eyes, and I stood there staring at him like I was waiting for proof that he was real. Melissa slept in fits, half awake with guilt every time Max cried, apologizing even though she had nothing to be sorry for. Her body was still healing. Her eyes stayed glassy for days. I told her not to worry, that I had it, that we'd figure it out. I wasn't sure I believed it, but I said it anyway. I started reading articles, books, forums, parenting sites with names that sounded like they were written for people who owned matching pajamas and had nurseries with custom wall decals. I didn't care. I just needed information. How to sterilize a bottle. How often to feed him. How many wet diapers in a day. I learned what cradle cap was. I learned how to hold him when he screamed for no reason at 3 in the morning and how to rock him until he forgot what he was angry about. I learned how to sleep standing up. I learned how to survive on 20 minutes of rest and a stale granola bar. The apartment transformed. The desk turned into a changing station. My bookshelf got filled with baby supplies and half-used packs of wipes. There were bottles drying on every surface and a rocking chair I bought secondhand off a woman who cried when she helped me load it into my car. She said her son had outgrown it. I didn't ask how long ago. Melissa slowly started studying again. At first just flipping through old notes, trying to remember things she used to know like the back of her hand. Then she pulled out her laptop, started logging into lectures. I could see her coming back to life piece by piece. Her posture straightened. Her eyes started focusing again. She still had dark circles, still looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. But there was something there. Determination. Maybe even hope. Max grew fast. His cries changed pitch. His eyes started tracking light. His little fingers curled around mine with more strength than made sense. I held him every chance I got. I whispered things to him. Nonsense. Stories. Code. I told him about music. About the sky. About how his mother was the strongest person I'd ever known. I told him I wasn't his father, but that I'd be there anyway. Every day. Every night. No matter what. Some days, I'd look at myself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognize the guy staring back. Eyes bloodshot. Hair a mess. Shirt stained. But alive. More alive than I'd been in years. Exhausted, yes. Overwhelmed, constantly. But alive. Because for the first time, there was something in my life that felt like it mattered more than just getting by. And every night, after Max finally fell asleep, and the apartment went still, and the hum of the fridge filled the silence again, I'd look over at Melissa curled up on the couch, a textbook open on her lap, and I'd think about how far we'd come from that night we walked out of our parents' house. How broken we were. How unprepared. How lost. And how we were still here. Somehow. Together. Making it work. One sleepless night at a time. It was a Wednesday, early evening, the kind of dull gray day where the sky just hangs low and heavy like it forgot how to let go of the rain. And I was on the floor of the living room trying to coax a stubborn dinosaur puzzle into its proper shape, while Max sat cross-legged beside me, cheeks smudged with peanut butter, his tiny fingers working so seriously like he was building a machine instead of fitting together cardboard edges. The apartment was a mess, laundry overflowing, dishes stacked in the sink, 2 toy trucks buried in a pile of unfolded towels. But for once, it didn't bother me. It was quiet. He was laughing. And I wasn't looking at a screen or an invoice or a pile of overdue client work. Just him. Just this. I don't even know what made him say it. There wasn't any big moment. No music swelled. No slow zoom in. He just held up one of the missing puzzle pieces, grinned wide, and said, "Here, Dad." That was it. Just 2 words. Soft. Simple. But they hit me like a brick to the chest. I froze, hands still midair, the corner of a stegosaurus tail pinched between my fingers, and I looked at him like I hadn't seen him before, like the face I'd watched grow and shift and laugh for 3 years had suddenly changed shape. He didn't notice. He just kept smiling, handed me the piece, and went back to work like it was the most normal thing in the world. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. My throat locked up and my eyes started to sting before I could even think about stopping them. I nodded, maybe. I don't remember. Everything got blurry. There was this strange ringing in my ears, like a memory trying to force its way to the surface. I felt warm and cold at the same time. Like joy and panic had collided in my chest and didn't know how to settle. Melissa was standing in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a dish towel in her hand. She heard it. I know she did. I didn't have to look at her to feel the shift in the air. But I did look, eventually, and when our eyes met, I saw it. This quiet, raw ache in her expression that cut deeper than anything she could have said out loud. She gave me the softest smile, just a flicker of it, and her eyes filled with tears she didn't bother wiping away. Neither of us said a word. Because what was there to say? He didn't know. He was just 3. He knew I fed him, changed him, held him when he was sick, read to him when the shadows got too big, lifted him when he couldn't reach something, carried him when he was too tired to walk. He knew I was always there, that I never left, that I never made promises I didn't keep. And in his small, perfect world, that's what a dad was. Not a title, not a name, a presence, a heartbeat, a constant. But I knew, and Melissa knew, and I think that was the part that hurt the most. Not that he called me dad, but that somewhere deep down I wanted him to keep calling me that forever, even though I wasn't sure I deserved it. I wasn't his father. I hadn't created him. I hadn't been there for his first heartbeat, hadn't been the reason for the color of his eyes or the way his hair curled at the back. But I'd been there for everything since. First words, first steps, night terrors, fevers, birthday candles, screaming fits in the grocery store. That weird phase where he only ate string cheese and blueberries. Every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every time he reached for a hand, and mine was already there. Still, the doubt crept in. Quiet at first, then louder. What if he asked one day? What if he stopped? What if she met someone? What if he left too? Just like Josh did. What if I was just the warm body holding a place until the real thing showed up? I sat there with the puzzle half finished, his tiny body pressed against my side, and I felt more love than I thought I could hold. But also fear. This massive, coiled thing in my chest whispering that none of this was permanent, that love didn't always win, that sometimes the people who gave you names also took them away. Max didn't notice. He kept building, kept talking to the little plastic dinosaur in his hand, and I nodded along like I was listening, but all I could hear was the echo of that word. Dad. Like it was a gift I didn't know how to carry without breaking it. Melissa didn't say anything that night, but when she passed behind me to gather up some of the laundry, she rested her hand on my shoulder just long enough for me to feel it. Just long enough to let me know she saw it too. The joy, the pain, the fear. And I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just closed my eyes and held on to that moment like it might be the last thing that ever truly belonged to me. He messaged her out of nowhere. A short, stiff text that didn't even say hello. Just Melissa, I need to talk to you. She showed it to me without saying a word, her hands shaking just enough for me to notice. I felt it before I even read it. Like a crack opening in something we'd spent years trying to seal shut. I stared at the screen too long, like I was waiting for it to rewrite itself, like it might say wrong number if I blinked hard enough. But it was him. After 3 years of nothing. No calls. No letters. No apology. No attempt to check if she was okay. If he had a son. If we'd even made it. He was in Seattle now. Startup money. Clean suits. His own company, apparently. Some kind of logistics tech. Big clients. Big growth. The kind of life you only see from a distance or in headlines about people who sold early and bought in young. He said he was sorry. That he panicked. That he was scared and selfish and didn't know how to handle any of it. That he'd never stopped thinking about her. About Max. About the life he could have had. And now he wanted to see his son. Just once. Just to say something. Anything. Before it was too late. I laughed when I read that part. Laughed so hard I had to leave the room. I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the tub trying to breathe. Because the rage didn't come all at once. It crawled up slow, like something alive, wrapping around my spine, squeezing behind my eyes. I wanted to smash something. Not for revenge. Not even for me. For the nights she cried alone. For the formula cans stacked like debt in the corner. For the hospital forms I signed in someone else's place. For the first time Max had a fever, and I sat awake with his tiny body burning against my chest, not knowing what to do except hold him and pray it passed. For every single moment that coward decided he didn't know his child a goddamn thing. But Melissa didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't throw her phone across the room like I thought she might. She just sat at the kitchen table, silent, looking down at the message like it was a puzzle she couldn't solve. I asked her if she was seriously considering this. She said she didn't know. That part of her wanted to tell him to rot. But another part, quieter, smaller, thought maybe Max deserved to know. To have the truth, even if it was ugly. She said it like a whisper, like a confession she'd been holding in for years. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't be the one to make that decision. He wasn't my son. Not on paper. Not in DNA. Not in any of the ways that would ever hold up in court. But he said my name first. He reached for me when he was scared. He asked for me when he couldn't sleep. He called me Dad, and I called him mine. The next morning, I made breakfast while she packed Max's school bag. She moved a little slower than usual. Less sure. He was humming to himself at the table, drawing something with a crayon on the back of a grocery receipt. A stick figure with messy hair and a square in its hand. When I asked what it was, he said, "That's you. You're fixing the computer." I smiled and nodded and turned back to the stove before my face could give anything away. That night, after Max was asleep, Melissa sat on the edge of the bed and told me that she wasn't sure what the right thing was. That part of her still hated him, that she could never forget what he did, but also that she didn't want to lie to Max, not forever. She said she felt like if they met, even once, it might give Max something he'd wonder about anyway later. I wanted to tell her no. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just asked, "And what about me?" She didn't answer right away. She looked at me with those tired, heavy eyes and said, "You're his dad. That won't change." But I heard the crack in her voice. I heard the fear. Not just hers. Mine too. Because the truth was I had no claim. No legal right. No title that could stop this man from coming back and deciding he wanted the life he walked away from. And maybe Melissa didn't know what she'd choose yet. Maybe she really believed it wouldn't change anything. But I'd seen how things change. I'd lived it. I knew how fast things could fall apart. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel since the day we walked out of our parents' house with nothing but a bag and each other. I was afraid. Afraid of losing the only family I had. Afraid of watching everything I'd built, not for myself, but for them, get erased by someone who'd done nothing but disappear when it mattered most. Afraid that love might not be enough. I should have known the moment he walked through the door of that coffee shop in his tailored coat and clean-shaven smile that he wasn't just there to see Max. That first meeting was calm, careful, calculated. The way someone speaks when they've already decided how they want the story to go, but they're pretending to write it with you. He sat across from Melissa with that practiced regret in his voice, talking about missed time and making things right. And when Max reached out and touched his hand like he was petting a stranger's dog, I saw something flicker in both of them. Not connection, not comfort, just the cold, confusing weight of recognition. Melissa didn't say much. I didn't say anything at all. I just sat there with my hand on Max's back, feeling like I was slowly being erased. It didn't happen all at once. He didn't push. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he lingered. He invited us to dinners, sent little gifts for Max, asked questions about his favorite toys, remembered birthdays and allergies and bedtime routines like he'd earned the right. And then, one afternoon, he took us out for a drive and said he wanted to show us something. I didn't want to go. Melissa said we should. Max was excited. I said fine. The house sat on the edge of the lake, big windows, white wood, the kind of place you see in magazines that smell like leather and wealth and time. He opened the door with a key he hadn't even needed to remove from his pocket and said it was ours. All of it. Paid in full. Bedrooms for everyone. A nursery if we wanted it. Room for Max to grow. A view of the water. A place with real walls and real silence. Melissa looked at him like she couldn't breathe. I looked at the floor and said nothing, because what was there to say? We moved in a week later. Not because we wanted to. Because Max deserved more space. More sun. More than a one-room apartment and recycled heat. Melissa tried to explain it to me the first night we slept there, her voice quiet from the other side of the hallway, saying this was just a gesture, just a gift, that it didn't mean anything else. But I'd seen the look in Josh's eyes. It meant everything. He asked her 2 months later. We were sitting in the backyard, Max chasing bubbles across the deck, and Josh got down on one knee with a ring that looked like it belonged to someone else's life. Someone else's dream. Melissa froze. Not in shock. In recognition. She'd known it was coming. We all had. The lake was still. Max was laughing. Josh held the box open like a man sure of his timing. And I sat there staring into the water, listening to my heart go quiet. She didn't say yes right away. She said she needed time. She took long walks, stopped answering texts for hours, stared out of windows like she was waiting for someone to give her permission to disappear. I didn't ask her what she was thinking. I already knew. She was thinking about Max. About safety. About stability. About giving her son something she never had. Not love. Not passion. Just structure. Clean walls. Private school. Normal. When she told me she'd agreed, she couldn't look me in the eye. The wedding was beautiful. Lavish. Impeccable. Everything in its place. Glassware that glinted in the sun. Flowers arranged like they were painted. Music soft and polished and hollow. I stood at the edge of it all, stiff in a rented suit, watching her in that white dress, Max clinging to her hand like it was the only thing holding him to the ground. Josh stood beside her like he belonged there. Like the years he vanished had been scrubbed clean. People smiled. Clapped. Took pictures. I didn't smile. I couldn't. My jaw was too tight. My hands too still. I watched them say their vows, speak those practiced words, and I waited for the part where the floor would open beneath me and swallow me whole. It didn't. It just held me there, breathless and alone, while everyone else moved forward. Melissa glanced at me once during the ceremony. Just once. A flick of her eyes. And I saw it, the sadness, the apology, the quiet, choking guilt that wouldn't leave no matter how good the cake tasted or how bright the chandeliers were. And I stood there, applauding with the rest, my palms cold and dry and empty, knowing I was no longer part of the story. Just the footnote someone had to make space for. It had been raining for hours, the kind of steady, relentless downpour that made the world feel smaller, quieter, like it was folding in on itself. I was on the couch, half awake, the television playing something I wasn't watching, just sound to fill the spaces I hadn't figured out how to live in alone. The apartment felt emptier than it ever had before, even back when it was just me and a mattress on the floor, before the bottles, before the drawings on the fridge, before the sound of Max's feet running across the hardwood, like he had somewhere urgent to be. Now it was just a shell. Clean, quiet, cold. I hadn't spoken to Melissa since the wedding. She'd sent a picture of Max once. That was it. No words. Just him in a collared shirt, smiling with too many teeth. I didn't expect the knock. It wasn't urgent, just soft enough to feel strange, like whoever was on the other side didn't want to be heard. I waited, thinking it might stop. It didn't. I got up, moved slowly, like it could still be nothing. When I opened the door, the air rushed in, wet, cold, sharp, and they were standing there, both of them, soaked through to the skin like they hadn't thought to bring an umbrella. My father looked thinner than I remembered. Smaller, somehow, like something in him had given out quietly and never come back. My mother looked older, her face drawn and pale, hair pulled back in a way that exposed everything time had done to her. Neither of them spoke right away. They just stood there in the rain, holding nothing, saying nothing, like words were too fragile to be the first thing between us. I didn't invite them in. I didn't move. I just stared at them until my mother's shoulders began to shake, and she pressed a hand to her mouth like she was trying to stop something from spilling out. My father looked at the ground. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red, not from crying, just tired. Exhausted in a way I had never seen on him. She was the one who spoke first. Her voice cracked right through me. I'm sorry. Just that. No excuse. No defense. Her hand dropped from her face, and I saw the tears in her eyes. Real, thick, desperate. She took a step forward, not enough to cross the threshold, just enough to be closer. I was wrong, she said. We were wrong. About everything. My father nodded, slow like it hurt. He opened his mouth and tried to say something, but nothing came out at first. Then he cleared his throat and said it again, this time like it was breaking him open. I'm proud of you, David. It didn't feel like victory. It didn't feel like anything, not right away. My throat tightened. My hands curled into fists and then let go without knowing what they were doing. I couldn't speak. I didn't trust my voice. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shut the door. I wanted to step forward and collapse into someone's arms and scream for everything we had lost, everything they had stolen from me in silence and control, and the slow erosion of love disguised as rules. Instead, I stood there, rain seeping into the carpet behind me, and I watched my parents break. Not loudly, not with drama, just in the way that people do when they've finally seen the damage they've done, when the denial dies and there's nothing left but the wreckage. I don't expect anything, my mother said. I don't expect you to forgive us. I just needed you to know that we see it now. All of it. What you've done. Who you've become. My father didn't speak again. He just stood there, shaking, hands loose at his sides, looking like a man who had lost the fight he didn't even know he was in. I stepped back. Not a lot. Just enough to let them see they could come inside if they wanted. And for the first time in my life, they didn't ask for permission. They didn't comment on the mess or offer advice or correct my posture or remind me of what I'd done wrong. They just walked in, quiet, soaking, and broken, just like me. The drive to Seattle felt longer than it should have, even with the roads clear and the sky open for once, but I didn't mind the silence. I kept the windows up, the heat low, my hands steady on the wheel as the trees rolled past in their late autumn stillness. By the time I reached their house, it was already glowing. Warm light behind the windows, movement behind the curtains, laughter leaking out onto the porch like the walls couldn't hold it in. I stood there for a minute before knocking, adjusting the collar of my coat, breathing slow, letting the cold settle into my lungs the way old memories sometimes do. Melissa opened the door before I could knock. She smiled. Not the polite one she used to wear around our parents. Not the tired one from the years in the apartment. This was different. Softer. Real. She pulled me into a hug without a word, held me longer than she needed to, and when she let go, I could already hear Max's voice in the other room calling out something about pie. She led me inside, and I followed the smell of roasted turkey, cinnamon, something sweet burning faintly in the oven. The living room was full. Max was on the floor, knees tucked under him, holding a crayon and pointing at some picture book, but his head snapped up when he saw me. He didn't say anything, just smiled and came running, throwing his arms around my legs before I could even take off my shoes. I crouched down and held him, felt the weight of him, heavier now, stronger, still mine in all the ways that mattered. My parents were already there, sitting side by side on the couch like they used to at church. Only now they looked older, gentler, like time had smoothed out the corners. My mother held a mug of tea between both hands, her eyes following Max's every move like she couldn't quite believe he was real. And when he climbed up beside her a few minutes later, settling into her lap like he'd been doing it his whole life, she didn't cry, but her lip trembled, and she held him like he was made of something sacred. My father sat quietly beside her, not saying much, but when Max turned to him and asked about the Navy, the only thing he remembered from some story I told once, my father leaned forward and started talking, slow and patient, his hands moving the way they always did when he wanted to get the shape of something just right. For a moment, it felt like nothing had ever broken. Josh stood by the counter, carving the turkey. He looked different now, still put together, still sharp, but there was something in the way he moved, slower, more deliberate, like he was trying not to take anything for granted. He called out a joke, something dumb, but Max laughed, and Melissa did too, and I found myself smiling even though I didn't want to. I sat down beside her at the dining table, our knees touching under the cloth, and she reached out and took my hand without looking at me. Just held it. Light, steady, like she'd always known I'd still be there. And for a while, I didn't speak. I just watched, listened, let it all move around me. There was food, too much of it. Someone passed a bowl of mashed potatoes, and no one knew where to set it down. Max spilled cranberry sauce, and my mother laughed so hard she nearly dropped her glass. Josh offered wine, and my father took it. They talked about nothing and everything. A story about Max's preschool teacher, a joke about the drive-in from Lake Pine, someone misremembering the lyrics to an old Christmas song. And in the middle of it, I just sat there with my sister's hand in mine. Watching the family, I thought I'd lost fill the room with noise. I didn't speak about the years before. No one did. We didn't need to. It was there anyway, in every glance, every silence, every grateful touch. What mattered now was that we'd made it here. Somehow. And maybe they'll never know all of it. The nights I stayed up wondering how much more I could give. The hours with Max pressed against my chest while I wrote code with one hand. The guilt I carried. The fear I still do. But I know what I gave. I know what it cost. And I know I'm the reason we're all still sitting at this table.